community. Hello, everyone. This is Dawn Stone. I'm the Director of Community Impact and Equity Initiatives at the Center for Nonprofit Management. We are here with Phil and friends today on this lovely Friday, community conversations around youth and the LGBTQIA+ community. So Phil, I'd like to go ahead and turn the convening over to you. And thanks for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Dawn. I appreciate it. Today, our conversation is entitled, What's the Tea when it comes to LGBT young adults, teens, and youth in our community? Today, I am really happy to be joined by a number of people in our community, and we'll have other guests popping in and out as we have discussion regarding the lived experiences of LGBTQ+ youth in Middle Tennessee. It should be no surprise to you that in the state of Tennessee, legislators have continued to attack LGBTQ+ youth in our state. And in this most recent legislative session, the sheer number of hateful bills that have been drafted and in some cases passed, or actually in many cases have passed, has made Tennessee one of the most unwelcome states for LGBTQ youth in the nation. From the basics of failing to provide non-discrimination and anti-bullying laws, plus creating policies covering LGBTQ+ students, plus creating policies covering LGBTQ+ students, to specifically creating harmful and hurtful laws like requiring parental notification of LGBTQ+ inclusive curriculum and allowing parents to opt children out from learning about LGBTQ+ history, to the state laws preventing transgender students from participating in sports consistent with their gender identity, and horrible attempts at diminishing members of our rainbow community over the use of a simple bathroom. And so with that said, I'd like to take a few moments to introduce the panel today. And I will start with Sean. If you could just go around, Sean, and start with your name, what you do or how you spend your days, and one interesting fact about yourself.
Sweet. My name is Sean Riley. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I wear a myriad of hats, but what brings me to this conversation is my work with the Program for LGBT Health at Vanderbilt, where I work to support trans patients in the Vanderbilt system and outside the Vanderbilt system. I also work with GLSEN, which is the leading national organization working to make schools safer for LGBT young people. And a fun fact for me, I got to compete in the LGBT Softball World Series a few weeks ago. I'm still riding that high. Didn't know that was a thing before this month or this year, but it's been very exciting to take part of.
Fantastic. Thank you. We're also joined by Kathy Holbrooks. Kathy, could you give a brief introduction? Kathy, I think you're still on mute. Could you give a brief introduction?
Doing this on my phone and it did something kind of strange. I don't know what it did. I'm Kathy Holbrooks and I'm involved with PFLAG Nashville. Right now I'm the community liaison and I am South Atlantic regional director for PFLAG, and that's Tennessee, Kentucky.
Oh, looks like Kathy is having some connection issues.
Sorry, my phone keeps doing something strange, but yes. I got involved as an ally. I use she, her pronouns. I got involved about 20 years ago as an ally because of political issue. And an interesting fact about me is several times when there was the gay 5K, I won my age group, and I won it because I was the only and my age group. And I missed that because the last time we did it, there was a woman she ran and I walked, and she was much smaller, and I came in second. So
thank you, Kathy. Ashley.
Hi, my name is Ashley Cease. I use she, her pronouns. I am a high school English teacher for Metro Nashville Public Schools. I teach at Hillsborough High School. This is my 4th year there, and it is also my 4th year being the school's Gender and Sexuality Alliance sponsor, and do a lot of work with the district as well, supporting other groups. My fun fact is that I am a certified master gardener for Davidson County, and I beat everybody in the organization by an average of like 20 to 30 years in age.
Wow.
That's great.
Wow. So we know who to go to when we want to, a bounty of vegetables and fruits, right? Okay, wonderful. And finally, Ty Brown. Ty, would you please give a quick introduction?
Hi, my name is Ty Brown. I'm so excited about this panel. I either know you or know of you, everyone here who's speaking. Vandy Trans Health are my heroes, so thank you all for your work. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the executive director of Nashville Launchpad. We are an LGBTQ affirming shelter program with some new programs we have starting up this, may come up that will starting up this November. Fun fact about me, well, I'm extremely famous, apparently, because I have an IMDb profile, which is just something that happened because a country artist named Brandon Stansel had a documentary film made about him, and I did a very short little interview piece for that, and apparently that's all it takes to get on IMDb. So you can look me up and seek my autograph later.
We should probably look at ways to get you on more documentaries and films, Ty, right? I think that should be how we focus our efforts.
Yeah. Phil, you're gonna have to talk to my agent about that.
Oh,
thank you.
Okay, all right, I'll take that. Thank you so much. So what I'd like to do today is kind of jump into conversation around the experiences of LGBTQ youth. We know that specifically this past year has been a really challenging year for members of our community. But we also know that there's a lot that has, a lot of the needs that have been expounded because of COVID and what that has looked like for our community. And so, Sean, I know that you spent a lot of time on the Hill this past year, where there's been some really hateful legislation driven towards LGBTQ youth. Could you take some time to talk about that specifically? And then I'd like to move into how that is how that impacts students on the ground in schools, Metro Nashville schools, and then we'll continue on the conversation from there.
Absolutely. And I just want to point out that a lot of us actually here spent at least some time on the Hill testifying or being part of bearing witness to just kind of the craziness that was going down this legislative session. But this year, so the way that the legislative session works, it's broken up into 2 years. So we saw the first half of the session happen earlier this year. And some of those same bills that were introduced earlier this year that hadn't been passed as of yet, we may see again in the spring as they finish this kind of legislative session. Unfortunately, about 5 bills were actually passed this year that were directly related to anti-LGBT legislation. If you zoom out, right, and you look at all the different legislation that was going on, it'd be easy to make connections between other things around like criminalizing homelessness, criminalizing various things that can also be seen in my view as anti-LGBT, right? But if we look specifically at the ones that are written to be anti-LGBT, there were at least 5 that were passed. Of course, the one that took a lot of publicity is the anti-transgender bill, the anti-transgender student bill, where athletes are not able to participate on the sports teams that align with their gender identity. They have to align with their sex assigned at birth. Which is incredibly frustrating for a state like Tennessee, as we're the only state in the country that does not allow you to change the gender on your birth certificate, the only state in the country. And so for our students who are athletes, that was really, really quite troubling. We've seen some other bills that were passed. There was a healthcare bill that passed that said that you are not able to give hormone blockers or hormones to young people who have not hit puberty. As it is written, that bill actually does not affect current best practice, right? Because doctors are not giving hormone blockers to people who are not producing hormones, right? If you have not gone into puberty, we're not going to give you puberty blockers. So as of right now, that bill actually isn't affecting the ways in which doctors are giving hormones to young people. But it becomes a problem because it codifies the way in which we care for our LGBT youth, our trans youth, right? And we don't see that with other populations. There isn't codes for if a kid is diabetic, this is what you do, right? This is not something that's normal to be in the legislation. And so, and it opens the door, right? So later on down the road, we can add to that legislation and say, hey, you can't have any kind of hormones, right? At any point under the minority age, which actually there is a bill that is still up for consideration that says you need at least 3 letters of support, one from a child or adolescent psychiatrist in the state. And I have done the research on that. There's about 4 child or adolescent psychiatrists in the state that will write that letter out of the 80 that exist in the state. So those are the ones that were quite troubling. And then finally, there was one on LGBTQ curriculum where parents will have the ability to opt out, right? Where teachers have to tell parents 30 days before they talk about anything LGBT in their classroom, and parents have the opportunity to opt out of that. Incredibly frustrating, especially as as a former teacher. Sometimes I'm planning my stuff like a week, maybe a day in advance. So to have 30 days in advance could be really difficult. And then finally, of course, of the sign mandate bill that we've seen, which affects businesses, that is currently being addressed in the courts. We have some local businesses that have sued the state in order to turn that over. But basically, it says that businesses that let people use the bathroom that aligns with their gender identity have to put up this very scary sign that says, like, caution, we allow people to use bathrooms regardless of their sex assigned at birth. Very scary and stigmatizing, and also puts a target on the back of businesses that are supportive of the trans community. So those are the ones that did get passed. We'll see a number of other bills, and of course, like anti-critical race theory, which I think has really strong ties to curriculum freedom and talking about what we need to talk about in schools. But we will see a lot of these other bills come back to haunt us in just a few months when the legislative session starts again.
Yeah, it's really unnerving in a lot of ways to see all of these types of legislation passed, and then how they're continuing to try to find ways to negatively impact the lives of members of our community. Ashley, how have you seen this sort of even just some of this initial legislation, but then also over the years of continued hateful legislation from the state? How has that been impacting your work on the ground within the school systems, public school systems?
Yeah, so I feel really fortunate to teach in a district like Metro Nashville Public Schools, especially with all of this legislation that's just come through. Metro has kind of taken a stand and been like, you know what? We're going to do what we're going to do to support our LGBTQ youth. And especially since we've partnered with the Centers for Disease Control in the past couple of years, it's really allowed us to get some intentional funding and intentional supports for GSAs within our entire school district, which is really cool because we serve like over 80,000 kids, right? We're huge. We have a lot of babies that show up with us all the time. And I think especially this year, we timed out really well there's been a huge push from the district to send out posters and lanyards and pins and flags and all of this stuff to our schools for all of the teachers to display in their classrooms, to wear on their shirts, to do whatever that shows this really aggressive, like in your face support of our LGBTQ kids. In terms of the whole, hey, you need to send information, 2 months in advance to your parents. It's kind of tough for me because I'm real gay. And so I'm like, do I send it home in my parent letter? Like 2 months ahead of time? Like hey, I'm a homo. Your kid's going to be with me for the whole year. I can't help that I'm gay, but we're going to be doing this thing. But I've always felt really supported by the district, and felt really supported within my own school. And I think the kids feel that too. And I think especially with this big push this year, they feel validated and seen. And, I've had more kids show out and show up to my GSA than any other year. My first year, we had 6 kids, and this year we have 45. So, I think it's a testament to what the district is doing, what the teachers are doing, and the kind of message that we're sending to everyone. And by no means do I think we have it all figured out. We still have some individual struggles, but I think as an entire district, we're seeing a really big shift in culture to be really intentional about the messaging that we are sending to our LGBTQIA youth.
Thank you, Ashley. It's really exciting to see in it the dramatic change over just a short number of years. And in the chat, Sean, you mentioned that there's 18 GSAs in high school and 12 in middle schools in the Metro Nashville Public School System, which is really, really exciting to see. But at the same time, when we think about Nashville, we are this little blue dot, or big blue dot, we could say, right, in the middle of a sea of red. And there is so much that has happened in just Davidson County, but we have situations like in Williamson County where you have a GSA float and you have parents freaking out over such a little thing, just in terms of expressing who they are. Kathy, I want to bring you into this conversation specifically because your work with PFLAG kind of crosses a lot of different areas of Tennessee. And what have you seen on the ground outside of Davidson County, specifically in terms of where things have been going? What has parental experience been like? And what are you seeing from the youth perspective outside of Davidson County?
Well, I do see a lot more people who are concerned outside Davidson County, particularly in rural areas. Recently, we had a parent come to our group, and their child had actually been in the hospital and actually had had a couple of suicide attempts. And this child was very afraid to go to the bathroom in public. I don't know if she was that much afraid in school as she was in public. And she keeps hearing all this stuff about the low life expectancy of trans people. And she's just really afraid out in public and to go about everyday activities, even outside school. And I just see a lot more people who are concerned in those areas. And I'll tell you, this is not in Tennessee, but a couple of years ago, some people tried to start a PFLAG in a small town in North Carolina, and they actually had a float in a parade. It was July 4th parade, I think. That was it was very generic, and they actually had death threats. PFLAG actually did call in the FBI. And the woman who was trying to start this, her family actually had to move out of the area where they were because she continued to get threats. And so that was really distressing to me. I've never seen anything like that happen in Tennessee, but it did happen in a rural area that's very similar to some of the areas in Tennessee.
Sean, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so part of my work with GLSEN is responding to kind of cases that pop up across the state. And I've been on the GLSEN board for now 8 years. And we're only a month into the school year, and this is the worst I've seen it ever. With the amount of cases that are popping up across the state, it is incredible. We have 2 students who were suspended in Fulton High School in Knoxville because people were transphobically bullying them. And when they responded using curse words, they were against the curse word policy. And so they got suspended, but the 2 that were bullying them using slurs that were not seen as curse words were not suspended, right? Suspended for 2 weeks. a trans student and a gay student, right? And the police were called, right? In a school district where they've had significant issues where a police officer killed a student in the schools, right? The police were called against these two queer students of color and trans students of color, right? In Blount County, we had an autistic student who the teacher was gaslighting and refusing to use his name and pronouns. In Norris County, we had a teacher attacking students on social media, a teacher attacking students on social media. In Lebanon High School, we had a teacher who was fired, and we expect that it's because of her LGBT identity. And a lot of this stuff has been happening forever, but the acceleration of it is incredible. And I really think it's the legislative session, right? It's this legislation that has created this backdrop that has enabled and emboldened people to act this way. Up until 2016, we saw a decrease in schools of hate crimes, right? Hate speech, assault, both verbal, physical, and sexual assault had been going down. 2016, all of a sudden gone up again, and we're seeing an incredible spike even again, right? And that's just incredibly scary. And listen, Tennessee is like struggling to keep up a lot of the time, right? I'm not kidding. There's at least 3 or 4 parent emails a week with people who are concerned about their young person in school. So it's an incredibly scary time, and the ways that it's impacting the young people's mental health, again, as in trans health, a lot of my work is responding to patient calls, particularly when they're in the psych hospital. I am seeing every week a record number of trans patients being checked into the psych hospital, right? And that is not because trans people are getting crazier. It's because the landscape around them is really disabling folks and making them feel scared and depressed and anxious, as a lot of us are. So it's an incredibly stressful time for Tennessee trans people, but queer people in general.
Kathy, were you going to add to that?
I do know that there was one family who was in a different area than Metro Nashville who recently moved. They moved to a different state because everything here was so unwelcoming for their trans son. So they actually moved out of the state. And so all these laws are keeping people from coming to the state that very talented and good people, and are making people move away.
We're asked that all the time in the clinic, right? From parents, like, where should we move our kid to? Deeply concerning.
Ty, I want to bring you into this conversation because I think it's important to note that while there is, we see it's sort of a trend line across the state to where, especially in rural counties, if an LGBTQ youth is coming from a home that is not accepting, or where their lived experience is diminished, or they've been put through some kind of a conversion therapy, that they're coming to Nashville to find community and to find safety. But in many cases, that also impacts homelessness, it impacts mental health, and all of that is directly aligned with the work of Launchpad to some extent. And so I'd love for you to talk about Launchpad and what you're seeing from a rural coming into a city perspective, but then also talking a lot about what the work that you are actually doing during the winter months and really year round.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you all for sort of sobering sort of analysis here. I had the displeasure of testifying in front of one of the committee meetings around the puberty blocker bill. And the point I tried to make there is that there's a straight line from not just the legislation, but from the discussion of the legislation. When the legislation gets into the news, there's a straight line from there to the people we will see coming to our door. That's just because what it does is it sort of gives permission to hate. It validates the feelings of parents that, yeah, there's something wrong with my kid is bad, and they will act on that, be abusive, kick people out. And we know that nationally, up to 40% of homeless youth in the 18 to 24 age group identifies LGBTQ. we see similar numbers. We don't always know. We do ask, but people don't always necessarily tell us. So there's a direct line there. And in Nashville, my big concern right now, all of these things are true, but if you add somebody who's coming from a place with lack of resources. So I have a friend in Williamson County who has hosted many of her kids' friends who have been kicked out of their homes. So they have friends with resources, they have a place to be. If you don't have those resources, if you don't have that sort of extended network, then you're going to end up on the streets. And so we see a lot of that. All we are is a shelter. We traditionally have been just mattresses on a floor in churches. This past year, we were using motels, which we couldn't reach as many, but it was because of COVID. We're still dealing with COVID now because we function primarily with volunteers and it's congregate. So having a lot of people in the same space is not real safe. We've actually delayed our shelter program and starting another program we wanted to start anyway, which I'm very excited about, which we call more emergency housing rather than emergency shelter. We are renting apartments and putting up to 6 youth in the apartments. So they've got a smaller group setting, a supportive community, and they would keep those spaces as long as they need them. Now, right now it's only at night. So it's basically like shelter pods or something. So, but we're modeling ourselves after a place called the Ali Fournet Center in New York City, which they not only have done amazing work, they're like 20 years ahead of where we are, but they got a grant to do technical support. So they put together little conferences and work one-on-one. And so they're kind of helping us expand. The motel program was a nice upgrade from the traditional shelter, but it has a lot of issues. It's expensive and people can be kind of isolated. So this is an approach that we hope will eventually be shelter, emergency housing, and then transitional living. And so that you've got, because the issue that I want to bring to this is there's no housing, y'all. So once someone gets on the streets, there are programs that exist. There's a rapid rehousing program. Section 8 has started, they've started reserving some Section 8 vouchers for people who are literally homeless, and some of those will filter into the 18 to 24-year-old space. But there aren't that many people offering Section 8 right now. There are not a lot of landlords who want to do that, so the wait list is quite long. And the rapid rehousing, even when it's fully running for 18 to 24, not everybody's going to qualify. And so the Oasis Center, who is pretty much the exclusive provider of the rapid rehousing, which is a pretty cool program. They will pay for deposit, first 3 months rent, and then kind of provide rent support, a little bit lesser amounts in the months following that, and also try to provide some wraparound services to keep people in housing. They have not, they were at capacity. They stopped accepting new clients back in March, and I'm still not sure when they're going to restart that. So we try to do things like shelter, and I want to say this carefully because I know that the people in the city who are working on issues of homelessness are doing the best they can, and they have good hearts. But when we talk about shelter, the response we get these days is, well, yeah, but shelter is not an answer. We want to get people into permanent housing. And, nobody in this business says, yes, please come live in the shelter the rest of your life. That's not what we're doing, but it takes a long time to get housing. There's not a lot of resources. And then when you add to that, the 18 to 24-year-old age group, we get people straight out of foster care, people who've just been kicked out of their homes. They are not They are not necessarily ready to just be put into an apartment setting on their own. So that's kind of why we would like to offer this little 6-month, was what we envision the emergency housing program being, so that they can get some sort of coaching on life skills and thinking ahead a little bit. I've got some income, so how am I going to spend that wisely to take care of my food needs, for example, as opposed to just getting hot pockets from the MAPCO or whatever. And then the transitional living would allow for even more than that. But we get no city funding. The city doesn't really fund any sort of homeless programs, and in our view, there's the 18 to 24 age group, this is actually just considered best practice, really should not be housed with the rest of the homeless population because of the particular issues around being younger, more vulnerable, exploitable, subject to abuse. And then when you add in LGBTQ, it's even less safe. And we literally, the director of the mission has on several occasions publicly, she's not trying to hide it, has said to us, we have a young person here we cannot keep safe. Would you take this person in? Because they're not safe in the sort of larger setting of the mission. So there's issues of safety, there's issues with lack of housing. We get into the intersectionality. So we have LGBTQ, but we also have, over 50% of the youth that we see are of color. And then we also have the just lack of resources. And you put those things together and it's a mess. And it's a really difficult time. And of course, all the legislation that we've been talking about just makes that worse.
I think that's just a collective sigh that we all need to take, right? Because the truth of these experiences is just, it's heartbreaking, it's heart-wrenching. And, it's a hard pill to swallow in a lot of cases, in every case, really. And it takes a special group of people at Launchpad to do this work. It is tireless work. It is thankless work. And I think it's important to say yet again, there is no public funding from Metro government that comes to support Launchpad. So take that as you will. It is so incredibly important to help fund Launchpad and the work that they're doing in our community. Sean, I want to bring you back into this conversation now and talk a little bit about the mental health aspects, right? Because we know that if youth are experiencing homelessness, or they're not welcome in their homes, or their parents have disowned them, or they've been kicked out. And Ashley, you can probably also talk about this as well. Actually, all four of my panelists could talk about this, but the mental health aspect of this is so incredibly important, and what that does, what is as a young person is coming into their own, right? And 18 to 24 years old, those are the most important years of someone's life and laying a foundation to further success. And if they don't have the support mechanisms that they need, and they don't have a strong and their mental health is challenged in a lot of ways, it can lead to very disastrous futures. So could you talk a little bit more about that, Sean? And any of the panelists also, please feel free to chime in.
Absolutely. And I also see that Dr. Brady has been able to join us, so she might also be able to add to this as a provider. But
absolutely.
But yeah, like as I was saying, we are seeing with the Trans Buddy program, like record numbers of both adult and young people in, checking into the psych hospital for things like depression, suicidality, anxiety. A lot of people are anxious, as Kathy was mentioning, specifically around the rhetoric around bathrooms and like the low age expectancy of trans people. Like, part of the problem is that we only see these negative things in the newspapers all the time. My young people have no positive representation that's Tennessee specific, other than like small blips like Pride, right? Like around Pride, we see a few write-ups coming up, then we see a few write-ups afterwards. And then really, unless like a country music star comes out, it's really not something that we're seeing positive representation in the media, right? And so many of my young people, that is all they see, right? Especially when they don't have other LGBT adults in their space. Particularly with COVID and the pandemic, we're seeing that research actually out of Vanderbilt is showing that, LGBT young people are experiencing even greater disparities than other cisgender heterosexual young people, feeling more isolated, feeling more anxious and depressed and suicidal. Suicide ideation as well as suicidality has increased. But yeah, Dr. Brady, would you want to add to this at all? It's good to see you. Good morning.
Good to see you too. Sorry for being late. I got my Eastern and Central time messed up with another meeting, so I'm here now. Yeah, I totally agree with everything Sean said, because we see it up front. I'm one of the pediatric endocrinologists in our adolescent and pediatric clinic here at the Children's Hospital. And yeah, there's just increase in a lot of mental health concerns and increased hospitalizations. And I think it's within the children, it's within the families, and they don't know where to go. They don't know, who do I talk to about this? They feel safe, I think, when they come to the visit. So a lot of our time, I'm a physician, I'm not a psychologist, but I feel like I do a lot of counseling, even though I don't have a huge background in it. But I'm someone I'm someone in somewhere where they feel safe. And even I hear, like, I just saw a family yesterday, and they're like, oh, we can't get out of our house. And it's not just COVID, they don't feel safe to even leave in their small towns. And that's scary, and that's really hard. And I think it's hard as a physician and a provider. I don't know what I can do other than be here to help fix that. And I think, these kind of conversations are really important. And I think it spreads outside of Nashville too, because I think I see patients from all over. And a lot of my patients from Davidson and Williamson and Sumner seem to do a little bit better than my patients kind of further out. And I think that goes to say, like, pride and group therapy and parents just forming support groups for these individuals is helpful. But what do you do when you get farther out and you're the only kid, or you think you may be the only kid who may be gender diverse or LGBTQ or anything? So it's tough. And I think these conversations are really important, and I'm not sure, and people may have better answers than I do, but I think figuring out a way to show that there are safe places for individuals to go is really important. And, I was listening a little bit on the homelessness discussion too. And I think as my patients kind of age out of being with a supportive family, there is that, what do I do in the in-between if they're not heading to college, if they're not heading into the workforce? I have a lot of patients that are homeless that are kind of, feel very unsafe in that setting too. So a lot of what Sean has said, and I think data is helpful. I'm glad that Vanderbilt is collecting that because it's helpful as a provider. It's helpful as somebody who may be speaking to legislators about this, that we need support and we need help.
And then just to add quickly, like when young people are older than 24, I have a number of patients who are in their late 20s who are trans. I have literally nowhere to send them, like literally nowhere to send them. So I have patients who've been sex trafficked, who've been abused, who have addiction issues. They're back on the street when they get discharged from Vanderbilt, right? Like we have nowhere to send them that will accept them as trans people. I have patients who are deciding, do I try and pass as a cisgender man and get abused and assaulted and just, violated as the gender that I am in various ways? Or do I go and try and take my chances on the streets or doing some other kind of solution to that? But literally nowhere to send them once they've aged out of that 24 age. And even then, right, we have a very limited, space to send them because of research.
Yeah, we've gotten, so one new thing for us, we have a case manager who, in the motel program, something that we were able to start doing is providing some case management. We, just keep in mind, this was 2014 when we started. It was all volunteer, and then we would pay the overnight monitors, but that was about it. And so we would see the young people and enjoy being with them and try to create a safe, trauma informed environment, but that's about all we could do. So we started doing some case management since we had folks there in the motel. It's a little bit easier to communicate with them because they're always right there. And we kept one of our case managers. So even though our shelter program for this last season is done, we're still getting calls from folks, and she will do what our case manager, Samantha Ray, will do what she can to help. And we have been getting calls from trans people in that exact age range that Sean was just talking about. And we don't have a whole lot we can do for people who are within our age range, but we have just nothing really. That one was, it turned out to be a domestic violence, eligible for domestic violence programs. So we were able to connect her with those, but that's a very difficult situation for us, because we do get calls in that age range that you're talking about. And the other thing I just wanted to point out, that's behind this. So we talked about mental health issues, but everyone who comes to us has endured an awful lot of trauma. And so the role of trauma in this, and the role it plays in mental health and just resiliency and the ability to bounce back and deal with obstacles, and it makes everything so much harder. And so we try to do everything in a trauma informed way, but that's the other thing that is behind when we're talking about, for example, the impact of legislation on mental health. It's traumatic. It's every day being reminded I am not safe, and at any moment I could be a victim of violence. And it's also the trauma of the people who are supposed to love and support me have rejected me. And so you put all of those things together, and everyone deserves housing. Everyone deserves shelter until they can get that housing. But the population we're talking about specifically is highly, highly vulnerable. And so that's why we're trying to increase what we're doing to the extent that we can. But in any event, yeah, to echo Sean, we have nothing to offer either for that over 24 age group.
I wonder if the village at Glencliff, where they're building the tiny houses for people who are able to stay there once they get, if they're very vulnerable, I think that they're open to people who are LGBTQ. I did volunteer work with Open Table. Have you all talked to any of them about that?
I think that's mostly medical respite, like that's so. Now it does make me think, somebody coming out of a psych hospital, would they qualify for that? And that's a good question. Maybe a great question for social workers at Vandy to maybe look into, if that would be considered a way to get in. I think they're like the program director. I think it actually comes out of a nursing background, I think. So that's a great suggestion.
Kathy, I'm actually hanging out with somebody from the village at Glencliff later, so it's a great question, and I'm going to ask. Thank you for that. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
I think what's exciting to see is that there are organizations and startups here in the community that truly care about the homelessness of youth specifically, and homelessness in general, right? And there are really important elements that our organizations are aware of, and that they are starting to address on a in a unique way. But I don't think it's ever going to be enough until we truly embody the work of breaking down the reality that many of our people in the community are left behind, right? And forgotten about. I want to call everyone's attention over here to the chat feature where Sean just dropped in some really interesting data, not only a state snapshot from GLSEN, but then also a research paper from Dr. Gilbert Gonzalez about the impact of COVID and college-aged LGBT youth. I want to take a moment now and introduce another member of our panel. Brian Marshall is with us, and Brian Marshall is one of the founders of Mashup Nashville and does a lot of work on the ground, boots on the ground work within our communities of color, specifically in our BIPOC community. And Brian, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the work that you do with Mashup and the intersections with homelessness and mental health, and what you're seeing from the work that you're so closely involved in.
Yes. Thank you, Phil, for having me. And again, my apologies for just coming on. I got the time messed up. So I'm so sorry.
All good.
Definitely want to thank you all for allowing me to be in this space. And I'm so glad to see some other wonderful faces who are doing some great work in our city to address all of the issues, the health disparities, the social injustices that are happening in our city. Back in 2017, I started an organization called Mashup, as you mentioned. And Mashup, our purpose really is to increase the visibility of the health inequities and social injustices, and more so to fill in that gap for what other organizations are not able to do, but also being that feeder organization. When I say feeder, the reason why we created the name Mashup is to bring, and I like mashed potatoes, to just whip it all up together. And so we have all these different pieces of the puzzle here in Nashville doing different things. And when people come to Nashville, our purpose is to educate and disseminate, but also connect individuals to other services. And so we don't necessarily do the mental health training. We don't necessarily do the housing. But if you come to us, because we're connected to many different organizations in here, if you don't know of resources, then I'm gonna, if you're at Vanderbilt, I'm gonna get you in touch with Sean. I'm like, you need to know who Sean is. Of course, I know Kathy, if you're a mother, I have mothers who come to me and say, I need help, I need assistance with my LGBT child. We'll talk, having conversations, and we do some trainings as well when people reach out to us kind of for specific subject matters. But more so, we're here to connect people with the experts. And so I'm gonna send you over to Kathy to go to the PFLAG meetings. If you're someone who says, I know we have people come to us all the time. I need housing, I don't know where to go. But of course, we're gonna connect you over to Launchpad and to my good friends over there. And so we're the ones who educate, we put on events. We're really big on social media. We have our Instagram page where we put out information every week. We try to, number one, encourage our young people, we spotlight people who are doing great work in our community. We're always putting out information about different health issues that they need to be knowledgeable about. Right now, we're focused on COVID-19 because, of course, our people, and I'll be specific when I say Black people, of course, are at the top of the list for a lot of the comorbidities that we see in health. And with the onset of COVID, that just added another layer to the already long history of issues that we've already had to deal with on housing, the mental health. And of course, COVID-19 sometimes doesn't make it any better for our young people of color who are already going through many different issues. So right now we're focusing on educating our young people about vaccine and participating in vaccine trials, whether it be for HIV, over at the vaccine trials unit at Vanderbilt. We partner, currently we are doing a partnership. I have to make sure I get this right because I don't want to say the name wrong, but we have partnered with the COVID-19 Prevention Network, the COPVN, to disseminate information accuracy and dispel those myths that a lot of young people may have about vaccine hesitancy, to help them get vaccinated, while also still encouraging them to ensure that they are going to their medical appointments if they're HIV positive, if they've been lost to care. Because during this time, over the past 2 years in the pandemic, there have been individuals who maybe not have gone to care because they didn't have transportation, not have gone to care because they just didn't have a way to communicate or get in contact with a medical provider. And so when we call this, I'm reaching out to all of my connections. So everybody who's on here, if I don't know you, I need to know you because I'm gonna put my website in the chat because we have a resource page when you go to our website. And if you are doing something in our community and you don't see your name, and some of y'all who I know, y'all may not be on there because we just recently updated our website page. So don't be mad if you don't see your name on there. But please send me your information because I want to add you to our resource pages. So when individuals go there, they can see, oh, I need this service. Or, oh, I need to be connected to this here in the city of Nashville. And we also will place the information on our Instagram page. We're not if I don't care who you are, if you're somebody who connects with a young person of color or just anything, and we don't just get young people of color that come to us as well. I just want to be specific about that. I know this is specific about people of color, but we get all people who come to us about information. So please send us your, I'm sorry, yeah, thank you, Phil. I needed to send us a direct message. I'm like, why nobody say? But anyway, I'm not gonna keep going, but I'll go all day. But one of the things I want you all to look at on the website, we have an educational and training component to where, like, if you need help or you want more information about how to service young people of color as it relates to whatever issues that you have. It's not just me who's on management. We have other staff members that are part. We have volunteers. We have our board members who are also experts in the field would come and do trainings for you, whether, of course, now virtual or in person, just depending on the situation, to help understand the ongoing challenges that Black LGBTQ individuals face. So I hope that kind of answers the question. And again, I'm so sorry for like missing the 9 o'clock.
No, it's all good. Brian, thank you so much. I think, there's a couple of things that stand out to me, and we've had this conversation in other sessions as part of these conversations that we've been having with the Center for Nonprofit Management. And the one thing that I think needs to hit home every time that we have these conversations is that the HIV and AIDS in communities of color specifically are at a higher rate of contraction, at almost 2 to 1 in many cases, compared to our white communities. And a lot of that has to do with not only the work that, or a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's less welcoming environments in communities of color for LGBT folks, but then also, you even brought it up with the vaccine hesitancy. All right, there's a level of shame that also comes into all of this that really puts a challenge on members of that community, of the BIPOC community specifically. And if it wasn't for some of the work that you do through Mashup Nashville, it would be the lack of connection would be amplified even more, right? And I think that's just an important thing to note. And thank you for the work that you're doing. I want to pivot over now back to Ashley. All right, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what your experience is. We're going to be wrapping up here in a few minutes, and I want to touch on each area specifically, but with your work specifically with the GSAs, and as students are preparing for college and they're moving through this next phase of life, which is another critical element to growth, what are some of the things that members of our young members of our LGBTQ plus community need in order to live their full experience, and what can we be doing now to impact youth with positivity? And Sean, you probably will have something to add to that as well.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of different things that we need, right? And there's some things that we can definitely do to prepare them for that transition. We see the mental health struggles, with everything. Our kids are collectively hurting, whether that's from trauma at home or microaggressions or whatever it may be, or just a lack of positive representation. That's something that we see a lot of. And so especially with my work, what we pivot towards is kind of this 3-pronged approach, and especially with COVID and all of the mess that the world has been in for a hot minute. And one is really stressing the importance of community, and finding that community within each other and the importance of that, and having those that chosen family, of people that really are going to trust and show up for you, especially if you don't have that support at home or a supportive adult in your life at that point. The second prong is promoting queer joy. So as much as possible, providing opportunities for expression of love and identity and just all the goodness, finding things to celebrate, whatever size it may be, and really hitting home the importance of sharing that collective joy especially existing in a world where people don't want you to be around, because of your identity. And the last thing is really focusing on those mental health tools. How do we better cultivate a relationship with ourselves in this challenging world, and how do we move forward when we leave these spaces? And so a lot of the work that we're doing right now, like even this past week, we did the Trevor Project training, the lifeguard training on mental health and suicide awareness and suicide prevention. And we had 28 kids come, and that's 28 kids that have those resources and those skills now, to whether that's to better themselves or to help out a peer. And we do a lot of work that is similar to what Brian is doing with Mashup, and that is like pulling in as many dadgum resources as possible and skills, and everybody and their mama, getting them to come in and say, like, look, here are these people that can help you. Here are your options. Here are these resources that are within the district and outside of the district, in Middle Tennessee, to try to just cobble together a list of supports. And we talk about a lot of like finding those spaces on college campuses, and what does that mean, and like what rights do you have. And I don't get as much experience with that because I just haven't had that many seniors like go through yet. Most of my kids are still little. This is going to be I'm having my largest senior class this year. But a lot of it is, as I think, from a school standpoint, is how can we build as solid of a foundation as possible for when we don't have our eyes on these kids, we can't hug them, we can't check in with them, to give them the tools and the skill set to be able to kind of go forward and navigate this next chapter in a new space. So a lot of what we're doing is how do we heal the relationship within ourselves? How do we, safely exist in this world? How do we find those spaces? How do we advocate for ourselves? What's in our control and what's not in our control? Because at the end of the day, a lot of the times all these kids have is themselves, and all we have is ourselves. And so a lot of my work focuses on that mental health aspect, and doing what we can do on our end to cultivate those skills needed for advocacy, for self-love, for grace, for inner peace. We do a lot of meditation. So if y'all ever need to come do some circle breathing with us, we got space for you. But I think the biggest thing is just from an education side is what can we do to make you feel as good as possible and as loved as possible and give you those skill set. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done in that capacity.
So appreciate what you're saying here, Ashley. And I think it's so critically important. Just the other day, I was having a conversation at Pride with two completely different age groups, right? The first group of people that I was talking to were a bunch of teenagers from Williamson County, and it was their first Pride, and they were so excited. And while we're trenching through the mud and the rain, they were still so joyful because they had the opportunity to express who they were. And then my next conversation was with an older adult who has been involved with the LGBT movement here in Nashville for years and years. And he expressed how much he was thankful for how much the adoption of LGBT life has taken place here in Tennessee over his 60 plus years here in Nashville, which is incredible. Right. And I don't want to, I feel like it's 60 years, but he's not here, so I can estimate. And, he looked back on it as if I had these resources when I was a kid, how much different my life would be now, or how much different my life would have been in my 40s, 50s, and what my marriage would be like, and all the things that go into that laying that really strong foundation. And I think what's also critical is that, as we're laying strong foundations for high schoolers, for middle schoolers, and giving them the space to express who they are and to live in their truth, we also have to look at the data that, Sean just shared. I was scanning through this real quickly, and in the research paper from Dr. Gonzalez that came out, he found, he and his researchers found that 45% of LGBT people in colleges do not have or are not out to their immediate families, or they have some members of their immediate family who don't accept them or know about their sexual agenda identity. And that is, there's such an incredible element of life that is robbed not only from the youth, but also from their family when there's not the ability to be true to who you are and to to live in your truth with your full family. Let me put it that way.
You know, can I just make a quick statement?
Yeah, please.
This right here is a whole nother subject matter in its own. And you know, when we talk about, you know, Black people or Black LGBTQ, there are many different layers to this that have to kind of be uncovered. We have just have to be. I'm very real when I have these conversations. We have two different experiences.
Yeah.
When it as it relates to growing up, I have been working in the field with LGBTQ people for like about 4 or 5 years before I decided to even let my parents know officially. And there's many reasons why. And I felt crazy every day. I would come to work. I'm like, how is it I'm here helping all these people? And when I go to my parents' house, I still can't have these conversations, but I'm encouraging my young people to have these conversations. And after I went through my depression and I realized what they came from, it just comes from a lot of trauma that Black people separated from LGBTQ people have faced. And so there's a whole nother conversation to have about that. But, you know, I want to leave you all with this because these are ongoing conversations that I remember when I first met Kathy and we tried to start the section of PFLAG for Black parents of Black LGBTQ youth. And it was even hard to get those parents in the building to get that section of PFLAG going. But there's some other conversations we need to have. There's some things that we need to understand, but our parents need help as well because they were not taught the right thing to do. I remember when I worked over at Oasis Center, I was fortunate to go to some conference out in California where parents, mostly white, I didn't remember seeing any Black parents, were there with their trans, non-binary LGBTQ child at age 5, 6, 7, learning about, you know, how to be a better parent to their child, but they had the resources to do that. And so, you know, there's a lot of conversations that, you know, we need to have around that to understand with those gaps. And hopefully, you know, we can do something to fix and erect that because everybody should deserve to know who they are and be free and happy in themselves at a younger age. So we have a lot to address and talk about there. So I just wanted to throw that in. That was just on my spirit. I'm sorry.
Brian, thank you so much. Thank you for saying that. Kathy, you want to jump in here?
Want to let people know that PFLAG National is starting some groups. They're rolling them out October, November, December. They're going to be virtual, but they're going to be for Spanish speaking people. The meetings are going to be in Spanish. There's going to be a meeting for people of color, and there's going to be a meeting for Asian Pacific people. So if anybody wants some information about that, let me know. And we'd love to try to get more diversity in PFLAG and to maybe start back the group for African-American parents of African-American kids. So if anybody ever wants to work on that. But I appreciate the part about education about parents. I can remember a few years ago, I met a parent, it was in another PFLAG group in a different area. And he's one of the most supportive people I've ever met. But he said, I feel so bad because I had so much trouble when my son first came out. I feel as though I was really angry and mean to him. But I told him, I said, you don't know how much your story will help somebody because you came to a better place. And so there's a saying in PFLAG, when you don't need PFLAG, PFLAG needs you. So I just really want to let people know that everybody's welcome and please join us.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We're wrapping up here in just a few minutes, and I just want to open this up to the audience and our attendees if there's any questions. And I see here that Edwina, you have your hand raised. Feel free to come unmute and talk.
Hey, Phil, thank
Hey.
you so much. And Dawn, thank you for inviting me to this. I really wanted to just make a quick comment because you all said something that I just started with the board at SAC. And then also I work with young people around MMPS schools. And over the summer, we had our first in-person programming, and ours was an all-girls programming. And when I came back to the table, when we were debriefing, I was sharing with them about the different girls' experiences. And my daughter in particular, she came home and shared with me about a young lady who had came out to her and previously also had a lot of like ACE experiences. So, you know, her mother was murdered, and then she like was living here with her grandmother for the summer, and she had just confided in her. And my daughter was very transparent about feeling overwhelmed because she didn't know how to support this young lady. And so it reminded me, and at that table that night when her and I were conversing, I took it back to my team and I was saying, you know, as parents, I heard the person before me talk about educating the parents, but I really think that, and I've been sharing this with SAC, it's so important that we educate the entire community, because these parents go with their employers and with their colleagues. And if the culture and if the community is not understanding and knowing how to have these conversations, right? Or if the students' peers don't know how to have these conversations or receive it, right? I was very appreciative for my daughter to say she was overwhelmed, which meant then that I wasn't educating enough in our home, right? And so we started having open conversations, and she knew how to be more supportive to her friends, and just with like just being transparent, knowing how high the suicide rate is amongst young people in general, but specifically in these communities. I think it's just important that we really push the education, because sometimes what I'm seeing with working with young people in the community is that they may feel that they are isolated, right? And so if you can't go to your counselor because they're judging you because of your status or gender or identity at this time, and even if you're working through it, I meet a lot of students who are still navigating that, right? But they don't have safe spaces. And I think that what I dream of is that the safe space is not just within the community, but the entire community is a safe space where you can have these conversations, or you can be who you are and not feel judged. So I'm really pushing that education piece amongst, through the, you know, I know the hard one, which is the church world, you know, through employers and also in the schools. And we're seeing a lot better with MMPS, but I do want to see it even the more.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Oh, Tia.
Hey, so I just have a quick question, and thank you, Don, again for inviting me as well. And I appreciate what Edwina just said. My only question is, I see where it says these programs are designed for Metro, and so I actually don't live in Metro. I live on the outskirts of Metro, and my question is, how can these programs be how can they be expanded out into like the rural suburban areas as well?
I'll let any member of the panel take that on.
Well, one thing with PFLAG, we are meeting on Zoom now. And so people can join from anywhere. And you can go to our website, PFLAG Nashville, and find out how to sign up. But a lot of PFLAGs, I know there's been disadvantages to Zoom, but there's also been advantages, have talked about continuing even after we start meeting in person to have Zoom meetings so that people, it's not maybe as intimate as meeting in person, but it is helpful. And so we hope maybe to continue Zoom meetings along with meetings in person when we do get back in person.
Similarly, right, Listen Tennessee is actually a statewide organization. And so we are working with schools and communities and families from across the state. So although like a number of us are in Nashville, actually most of us are outside of Nashville at this point. And so a lot of the things that we do actually do go across the state now. We used to do like a virtual GSA. Our youth action teams are still virtual to make sure that kids from across the state are able to join. If you have any dope LGBT high school students who are interested in making schools and communities safer from across the state, please send them my way. We have accepted our team, but I accept grad students on a rolling basis. And so GLSEN is a really good or a good channel for that. But also, just to go back to PFLAG, like most of the time when I have patients or young people who are going back to places where there aren't resources, usually the only thing that are in spaces outside of Nashville is a PFLAG chapter. So oftentimes I will send even my LGBT patients to the PFLAG chapter, knowing that at least they have some kind of a local space that's accepting for them. So PFLAG has been an incredible resource, and I would highly encourage folks to just check out. There's chapters across the state. So, and of course, a lot of them are virtual, so people can access them even outside of the state if they really wanted to.
And I'll tell you, it's interesting. The organization started off called Mash Up Nashville because our focus was just within the Nashville city limits. And this is again back in 2017. And last year, and we still go by Mash Up Nashville because that's how a lot of people know us. But if you look at our social media and our website, it says Mash Up Nation. And that's because we wanted to expand outside of the city limits, because we recognize that, number one, we're looking at Nashville. A lot of people who we used to service in 2017 don't even live within our city limits anymore because it's not affordable, which is a whole nother conversation or another topic that we'll have that I won't get into on today. What we actually have started doing, the virtual thing has brought us about too, that when we do our registration for any virtual event, we ask for the zip code on the registration so we know where people who are connected to us live. And so, I haven't done any analysis on these zip codes where anybody who's connected to us now and live in the rural area, but we don't really know because, we have like about almost 1,000 people that follow us on Instagram. So people may be, from rural counties, they just don't let us know. And so just as the one way that we'll track, when we have events and people show up to our events, just take their zip code and if we, hopefully, and we'd love to come and expand out into our rural counties, if there's a need, if anyone reaches out to us and say that we are needed in those spaces. But I wrote that down. That was a good question because I think that we need to work a little bit more on being intentional about addressing our rural community. So thank you for that question.
Thank y'all for that response. Thank you.
Thank you all. So as we're wrapping up this after morning, oh my goodness, need more coffee. As we're wrapping up, I would love for each of our panelists to just sort of share some things that you're working on now for the future as school has started back up. Winter is coming, not to call on whatever TV show that is, and where you can use the most help from an organizational standpoint and from a volunteer standpoint, like how can people get involved? And so I'm going to start with Ty, and then we'll go around the group and we'll wrap up from there. You're on mute, friend.
My space bar, I'm not on mute now, I think.
No, you're good.
My space bar usually does it. For some reason, it chose not to cooperate with me. So thanks, everyone. This is a great conversation. I hope more of this will happen. I feel like that a sort of united effort around some of these issues would be helpful. Pushing around, I don't know, we can get anything state level, but at least locally and things like that. What we need right now, one thing we're excited to say is, last year we didn't really have a role for volunteers, and we've been a very volunteer-driven organization. But because of COVID and just the motel system, there was not really a way to do that. We do need volunteers again, so I'll be contacting our volunteers. But we welcome new volunteers as well. As NashvilleLaunchpad.com has some basic instructions about how to start that process. We also need we need a lot of overnight staff. And these will be shifts of 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. or also if they just want purely the overnight, 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. So that we'll have somebody covering that evening shift. And if you've ever volunteered in the shelter, it would be like that, but very condensed, and I think a lot calmer, because they're only going to be 6 people. So it's a chance to really bond and get to know 6 of our young people as we help them sort of get ready for whatever the next phase brings. So I think it's going to be a nicer experience than just being in our shelter has been. When we reopen the shelter, we'll need volunteers as well. But yeah, so even somebody who just needs a night a week for a little extra income or just wants to help us, but would like to get paid for that, please let us know. We have the jobs listed on Indeed.com, and you're welcome to contact me directly as well. So volunteers starting around November 1, we'll have volunteer trainings going on all of October. And then we need the overnight staff from 1 to 3 shifts per night for what I think, per week, for what I think is going to be a very fulfilling job. And then the overnight hours, of course, very calm because people are sleeping. So if you can do those hours, that's a great time to just do whatever you like for a bunch of the evening. So yeah, let me know if you're interested in either of those, and I'll pass it on to the next person.
I'll go. So for Glisten, Tennessee, we have, I'm going to put the Instagram on the chat. We have a number of needs right now. Our biggest need that's really coming up is supporting parents and families, right? Like a lot of the time we will route when folks need like peer-to-peer support to PFLAG, but a lot of the time it's like sitting with a family and figuring out like, how are we going to talk to this school, which is the work of Glisten. And so like people who are willing to kind of take those on, folks who are interested in training teachers, nurses, counselors. You do not have to have, a background in training. We will train you to train. That's definitely a need. And then sometime in the next few months, we'll be launching kind of a campaign to have volunteers to help us to audit all of the school district policies across the state to see exactly where different district policies lie. Do districts have supportive dress codes? Do they have supportive prom, things? Can people bring their same-sex partner to prom or same gender partner to prom? And so those are things, if you're really interested in like data, that's another really great space. So if you're interested, the best way to get in contact with us is Glisten, their Instagram, Glisten Tennessee's Instagram, which I posted in the chat. And we will be posting about some more open volunteer meetings soon so folks can get oriented. We've had a few in the last few months and they've been really successful. And we hope to invite some more volunteers throughout the semester.
Thank you, Sean. Ashley?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of like specifically, because I only work in one school with a set of kids, but we're always looking for LGBTQ adults in the community that are willing to come in and just kind of hang out and hold space with us. I think there's a lot to be said for kids being able to see adults that are out in the world doing whatever it is that they do and just existing and being okay and being like, look, like I made it this far. I've had these experiences, like it's going to be okay, little ones. Like we will get through this together. So we're always looking for queer adults to come and hold space with us. The other thing that we're working on is that we've partnered with Southern Word and their Right with Pride program. And so we are having them come in for the entire month of October to do a workshop, like an extended workshop with our kids. And then we will be working with them to do their first launch event for this year's Right with Pride stuff. So we're pretty stoked about that. And I think the other cool thing is that just like from these conversations today, and I was messaging Sean a little bit because we run a lot of the same circles with Glisten being so intimately involved with like high school youth and just like the kiddos. But it's given me a lot of stuff to think about listening to the other leaders from Middle Tennessee of how can we do better as a district. So I've got a whole laundry list of things that I'm going to run back to the district heads to be like, look, we're doing great. Let's do better. But if you're out there and you're queer and you want to come talk to high schoolers, hit me up. I'll put my email in the chat because we would love to have you.
Thank you, Ashley. Kathy?
Well, PFLAG, what I would like to do really is connect with some of the other organizations So if anybody would like to get in touch with me about coming and maybe speaking to our group, because we don't have a lot of volunteer opportunities, but we could also, maybe some of the people in our group would want to volunteer. And I volunteered along with Michael Redding at Launchpad, and it was a very rewarding experience. And I've done some stuff with Glisten as well. And so one thing that we've done this year that I've been surprised we've had so many requests is we've had requests from businesses to do training on trans issues. And Jake Martino, a trans man, is the president and put together a really, really great presentation. And so we've done a number of those, and I've been really happy to connect with people in the community. But I would really like to connect with some other organizations and see how we could help and also work. I've said this for years, as have all PFLAGs, work on getting diversity in our group. So thank you all for being here and for letting me participate.
Thank you, Kathy. Brian.
Yes, thank you again for inviting me back to this space to speak. I really appreciate listening and hearing and learning from everybody. As far as what Mashup has going on, we don't necessarily have any in-person events planned as of now. We're trying to keep everything still virtual, but we're still working around that. So one of the things that we'll be launching soon will be a mentor-mentee match. And so we realized we don't really just have the capacity to be everybody's mentor. We try, we would love to, and our hearts are big enough to love everybody. But we want to find people in the community who want to be mentors to our young people. And so we're going to be reaching out soon for people who just want to be a mentor, or just be that additional support for our young people and match them with someone that we after we go through questions and maybe an interview, who will be a best fit for our young people. And we're always looking for volunteers, because we, of course, will start back having in-person events soon. I know for sure in February, we'll be celebrating 5 years. And so there'll be a whole weekend of events that I'll be reaching out to everybody to come and participate, whether you volunteer, donate, or whatever your heart leads you to do. We'll also be doing some job readiness training for our LGBTQ community, just around resume building, around how to interview, how to look and search for a job. And so we'll be looking to bring in people who love to teach young people about how to put together resumes and interview. And so there's something that you want to volunteer or are interested in doing, I'll get the information out, and I will love to have you come and speak to our young people about those things. And then lastly, as we come into our winter months, we do twice a year this initiative called Come Out the Closet, where we ask people to get rid of those nice clothes that they have in their closet that, not that they can't wear no more. Sometimes you can't wear no more, because if you're like me, I definitely gained a lot of weight during the pandemic, and so I have a lot of clothes to give away. But we're doing our Come Out the Closet initiative. Probably within about a month or so, we'll be collecting clothing items for our young people, particularly for our homeless youth who will have to be outside, but we hope they won't have to be outside, because we know our beautiful friends over at Launchpad we'll have them come during the cold months. But if you have any clothes, go ahead and start, go in your closet. Come out the closet. Y'all like that? Come out the closet. Okay, I'm sorry. I know it's kind of corny, but I like it.
Thank you, Brian. And finally, Cassie.
Sorry, let me put my camera on. I gotta say, this was just great for me. I think having to hear from community is really helpful as a medical provider, because I hear science, and the needs of my patients and families. And so I feel like this was really helpful for me moving forward to provide. I love that PFLAG is going to be offering Spanish speaking opportunities, mashup. I've taken notes. This is fantastic. I don't know if there's a room for us or someone from my team to be involved in these discussions again in the future, but this was so helpful, and I'm excited to share it with my team and my patients. So I just want to thank everybody. I mean, moving forward, this is helpful. I think this is a good way to develop us as providers to these individuals and families. So thank you so much. I wish Melissa Cypersky could have been here too. She's our psychologist, and she loves all of you too. So I'm going to share this all with her. So thank you again.
Just
Thank
quickly,
you
if
so
you're
much.
interested
Yeah.
in legislative advocacy, get in contact with GLSEN. Please, 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 please. The legislative session is coming up. And if we're not the person, we have other organizations to connect you to get involved, just to keep an eye on what's happening. Right now, the hospital is not having volunteers, so we can't really have a space for that in Trans Buddy, but when the volunteers come back, we'll have space for that if people are interested in healthcare advocacy. But in the meantime, if you're interested in any way in getting involved, even if it's something small, like coming and watching some of the session, please follow us on Instagram, get in contact with us, because it is incredibly important and incredibly dangerous.
Thank you, Sean. Critical point there. I failed to do this at the beginning of our meeting and our time today, and so I would like to read a sort of a quick opening statement, and then we'll talk about a little bit about what we're going to be talking about next month, and wrap up here in a few seconds. So I just wanted to take a quick moment to acknowledge that the land that we're meeting on today is the traditional homelands of the Muskogee, Yuchi, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Cherokee, Shawnee, and Seneca peoples. This land has long been the center for Indigenous people to gather, trade, and maintain kinship ties. This land was violently taken under settler colonialism through genocide and open warfare, and the region that is now Tennessee still struggles for sovereignty, self-determination, and justice. The genocidal acts of settler colonialism extended to the peoples of Africa and their enslaved descendants. Even with eventual prohibition of slavery, slavery was an accepted practice before and after Tennessee statehood, and the vestiges of slavery remain present throughout the United States and directly affect the descendants of enslaved people. Descendants who helped define the African diaspora, rich and heterogeneous communities descended from African peoples. The genocidal patterns of violence against these people have been replicated to exclude and harm many from intersecting marginalized identities, religious, minoritized, disabled, LGBTQ plus identified peoples, BIPOC, and POC writ large here in the United States. These patterns of violence demonstrate that the pursuit to end state-sanctioned violence against BIPOC people is a daily struggle for liberation from continued social, political, and economic anti-Black racism and oppression. Today, we acknowledge that we are living, breathing, loving, grieving, laughing, and sharing space on unceded territory. May we learn to honor the historical and contemporary presence and power of the people and their belief that we must be caretakers of the lands and the waters for the livelihood of future generations. With that said, we will be meeting. Our next community conversation will be on October 29th. And we are going to be having a conversation around LGBTQ history in Middle Tennessee. And it is going to be a fantastic conversation. And I'm really looking forward to diving into that. In closing, please don't have a nice day. Have a day that matters. Have a day that is true. Have a day that is direct. And have a day that is honest. We'll talk to you soon. October 29th. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone.